Hey, Iburu, Iboya, Ibucheche, everybody in Cyberland. It's your favorite Babalao, at least I hope so, or Modu, or Dileke, coming at you with another great video. At least I hope so. You guys tell me, right? The likes, the shares, the subscribes, that's how you tell me you value, these videos, right? And today I was really getting at it hard, right? I got the podcast out. You guys haven't noticed, I got the subscriptions out where I'm trying to necessarily build those who really want to invest in their spirituality. Go ahead and join the subscription. Pick the subscription package you like, and then let's get after it. Right? You guys have my email addresses. You have any questions, comments, concerns, throw them in there. But I really want to get into now, most importantly, the next set of videos where it's probably going to be another 3-part. Hopefully, I can get it in a 2-part, but we'll see where this goes. Where we start to talk about Odi Meji, right? And when I start talking about Odi series, right, or the Odi family of things, right, we almost got to kind of look at it, and we got to better understand what is the Odi series all about, right? And anybody who has this sign, right, like myself, I am Odi Irete, Odi Leke, right? People who have this particular Odun, right, in one way, shape, or form, in their Awofaka, in their Ikofa, and maybe their Bawalaos, and they have it. There's something that we have to understand about this sign, right, or any of these signs. And as I go through, hey guys, if you have questions on this stuff, throw them in the chat so I can get to it as we go through this. So when we talk about the OD series, right, we talk about a body of wisdom grounded in earth, karma, ancestral reckoning, hidden transformations. And that's what the Odi Meji series talks about, right? Now, Odi Meji is one sign, the series is all. But when we talk about how it's paired with its variants, right? We talk about a lot of things that are encoded through patakis, right? Through analyzed, through spiritual, scientifical, esoteric layers, and we got to unpack this, right? So it's important for us to better understand so that we know where we're getting after. So something that, and if you guys see me look this way, I'm trying to make sure I look at the chat and make sure I'm not missing anybody. But some of the things that we have to remember, right, is that the core symbolism of the OD, right, represents the womb, represents the earth, represents the mysteries, represents the containment. It talks a lot about the ancestral karma, and a lot of it aligns with the feminine polarity of things. That's why in the OD series of things, we always have to talk about, we got to in tune ourselves with masculine or feminine based on the Odu, right? No different than, when you look at Eyobe, right? We talk about a masculine energy. When we talk about Oyekun, feminine energy. When we talked about Iwuri, we talked about masculine energy. When you talk about Odi, you talk about feminine energy. And as this rolls through, it gives you a deeper understanding. And that is something that we have to remember. So again, I appreciate you guys logging in. Let me know in the chat where you're from, right? Let me know your experience levels. Let me know your questions so I can give you a quick shout out because I love doing these things so that we can kind of chat it up. So when we talk about the introduction to the OD series, right? We also talk about the elements, right? We got to understand that all our Oduns have elements to include that, OD series is a very earth-based element, right? You begin to kind of see that even its fourth position within the OD series of things on the Yoruba cosmology, Ifa Odu, right? We talk a lot about structure, stability. We talk a lot about the hidden foundations, right? And we talk about the directional path that OD represents, no different than the East, the West, the North, and now the South, right? Because all these Oduns have representations. The OD series of things is the South, right? Very much aligned with karma, restrictions, responsibilities for all my astrological, subject matter experts out there in astrology, right? Aligns very much with Saturn, right? When we talk about the Odu, the Orishas that dominate under the Odi series of things, we talk a lot about Ogun, we talk a lot about Eshu, Obatala, Eguns, right? We talk a lot about Yewa, right? And that is something that we just got to understand. And then when you talk about the theme of the OD series of things, we talk about secrecy, spiritual, gestation. We talk a lot about where imprisonment of literal, not necessarily in literal sense, but in symbolic sense, right? Where we are kind of imprisoned to our own responsibilities, our own, um, I guess, responsibilities, I guess, and obligations, rebirth and trials, right? So we got to start to kind of look at these things, and we got to show the symbolism of the OD series of things so that you better understand where you align and what this means. Right. So when we talk about certain things in the OD series, we talk a lot about the symbolism of the mother of humanity, right? All the hidden truths that reside in there, right? All the hidden truths that reside even in your own life. And that's how you need to kind of take it. It speaks on, the internal warfare, the brujeria, the witchcraft, the ancestral debt, right? And the true consequences of being having an ego, right? And this is something that always needs to be remembered for anybody who aligns with the ODs, right? And we have to be able to command a deep, no kidding, Egun reverence, right? Because it's very much earth-centric rituals, right? Within the OD series, you have to have a strong connection with your Egun, right? And some of the common things that you got to be careful about. Hey, Buroboya, Alafia. Some of the I'm glad you wrote that there, Moyo, because I was like, man, is the chat working? But some of the big things that we got to be careful about is that, in the OD series of things, we begin to talk about certain taboos that fit certain Odus within the OD series, but more importantly, understanding that every Odun has a set of things that can block life, our life blessings, our love, prosperity, stability, right? Our health, right? And some of those things that we want to look out for, especially if anybody aligns with the OD series of things, right? Is you want to make sure that your digestive system, your reproductive system, depression, spiritual blindness, right? So the being blinded spiritually is also very important in these series of things because it begins to highlight that sometimes we can be naive. And again, I'm not just speaking to just those who have the OD series, I'm speaking to myself. So we have to always understand what that truth looks like. A lot of things and we always got to remember as we kind of dig into this, right? So I want to start, right? Like we always start, in Odi Obbe, right? And in Odi Obbe, we begin to kind of see, um, or not even Odi Obbe and Odi Meji. Let's just talk about that. Let's say that you have a sign of Odi Meji, right? At the end of the day, that begins to align with you. And what does that mean? Well, Odimeji for you is the development of the embryo, right, inside of the womb, right? A woman's about to have a baby. We talk about the development of the embryo. So if you align with Odimeji, you begin to understand that that's going to be very key, not only for the physical representation of what I just said, but the spiritual representation. You're a person that nonetheless has to be able to develop yourself, right? No different than a mother's nurturing a womb and has a fetus and the baby is growing and you have to take your prenatal vitamins. You got to make sure you're nurturing the baby. You're not doing anything that's going to hurt the baby, etc. And that's what Odimeji begins to tell you if you align with this particular Odu. In this particular Odu, we talk about the creation of a lot of the waterways, the oceans, the rivers, the lakes, right? Which begins to kind of show us, the essence of what this earth sign brings to the table. when you start to kind of talk about this, for the ladies would have Odi Meji, I really need you to make sure that your female reproductive parts and cycles and things are in par. And if not, are we doing the spiritual medicine or the physical medicine, right? Because doctors are still important. We can't negate them, right? Are we doing everything that we need to do to ensure that we are balancing ourselves out? The other thing that you have to be careful about is the establishment, right, of a hierarchy, right? Both pros and cons. The Meiji, you got to remember that this sign is what created the first monarchs of the world, the kings, the queens, right? And created this kind of this hierarchy in society, in government. If you live in the United States, you have a president. In other places, you have, dictators, whatever that looks like. Right. So in this particular sign, it's important for us to always remember that the establishment and the rule of law is important to understand, but making sure that you are part of that establishment is also important. Making sure that you understand the injustices of that system and making sure you understand the positives, but supporting that system is important. And making sure that you know your place is very, very important. This is a sign that's very spiritual. The OD series of things are very grounded with the Egun, so there's a lot of spiritualist aspects, mediumship, right? So if you are OD Meiji, you begin to learn quickly that you align very well with the Eguns. You can light a candle, pray to your Eguns, right? Your ancestors, and things happen. That's important to understand, right? This is where, where we have to make sure that we are cleansed because we are the temple. Odi Meji is the temple where you need to ensure that you're constantly cleaning yourself, either with herb baths, spiritual baths. You're doing something that's called an embomesi that Babalaos do, right? When we create a certain mixture of herbs, but we also include a sacrifice in it. Ewemesi is strictly herbs, and then you got different type of herb spiritual baths that you can do yourself that you can cleanse yourself with. This is a sign that the person, has to use the eguns for everything, but needs to ensure that they're clean. This is an Odun, an Odi Meji that talks a lot about temptations, talks a lot about lust and gossip, infidelity, right? And we have to be able to do something else that's very critical here, right? And this is not necessarily to bash anybody, but to remember that, nonetheless, we have to mind our business, right? You have to make sure that you are tight with your own circle, right? And you got to make sure that you're doing exactly what you got to do, because in people who align themselves with Odi Meji begins to find themselves trying to be that hierarchy that we talked about a second ago and starts to dive into other people's affairs. Don't do that. All right, this is a sign that the person needs to stay away, right? Because this was the creation of the oceans and the lakes, large bodies of water can sometimes be very temperamental for those who align themselves with this Odun because of the strong relationship in the pack with the creation of the world, the womb, etc. Right? So you got to be very careful, right? Make sure that you're not doing anything risky, in the water, you're not going deep into the ocean, strong currents, etc. Right? And you also got to be careful for places that have earthquakes, right? Because this is an earth sign, right? So for my folks who live in like, let's say California or places that are very prevalent to earthquakes, right? You got to make sure that you're protecting yourself, making sure you're doing everything to ensure that if something happens with the earth and there's an earthquake, you have everything ready. That's very important for you. The other big thing is that this is a strong sign of a local, right? Those who have the sign of Odi Meji have to align themselves with a local. You have to receive a local the soonest possible, right? So if you have Odi Meji, right, I recommend Odun of Ifá, or the Olokun of Ifá, I'm sorry. And I'm not saying that the Olokun in Ocha is not good, or the Olokun that is consecrated to Olorisha is not good, but I am saying that you should align yourself with one of the two, right? Nonetheless, right? And there's a good debate there that you should align yourself with the Ocha first, allow those blessings to flow, and if you really need something to come from the top rope, elbow drop type of deal, then you receive the Olokun Ifa, and that's perfectly fine to do it in that way as well. The other big thing about Olokun is because Olokun is the one that's going to provide you with that prosperity and that health that's going to be required in this sign. That's one thing. The other thing about when we talk about Odi Meji, right? We talk about a lot of the aspects, right? When we talked about illnesses earlier, we talk about in this particular Odun, Odi Meji, we talk a lot about the blood, diabetes, leukemia, stomach problems, diarrhea, you know what I mean? So you got to make sure you're taking care of yourself. You're consuming the right things and you understand what your body is doing and how is it doing it. So then that way you don't necessarily fall into any of those issues. The other thing about this sign is that, this is a sign that the person usually doesn't necessarily respect the the regime of things, right? And this is where respect is going to be very much highly necessary in this sign. Because when we talk about respect, we talk about making sure that in the spiritual hierarchy or even the physical hierarchy, you work in a business, you have a manager, you got a CEO, that's CFO, COO, whatever that looks like, a boss. We'll just call it a boss, right? In those, professions or those institutions, right? We got to remember that, we got to remember what our place is. Odimei is such a beautiful and spiritual sign that a lot of times we do more or we know more probably than those that are over us, or we think we know more. And we got to make sure that we know where we fit in, right? Or we find a place where we do fit in or that's a little bit more tolerant for us in the Odimeji. Odi Meji is the sign, right? Where we got to make sure that, and one of the big taboos in the sign is you can't walk barefooted in the house, right? Let alone work barefooted anywhere. If you can avoid it, avoid it. If you have to do it for spiritual things, that's okay. But you got to be very careful because the Eguns, even though this is a sign that's truly strong in your spiritualism and you're talking to your ancestors, right? There are still Egun Burukus, obsessed Eguns, Eguns that can do damage, right? And the first thing that they attack us with is illness, right? And you see that I already started to talk about illness a little bit, but how they get you is through your Ori. There is a portion of your Ori, an alignment of your Ori that's in your big toe, right? In your feet, right? That the Eguns come up and they attack, right? And that's where you start to kind of have that misalignment, where you begin to have that misalignment with your Igba Orun, which is your spiritual double, right? So if this is you walking, and this is your spiritual double, and the Eguns are attacking here. Now you're kind of walking, with one leg, and you're not completely aligned, and you got to be careful about that. So, one of the big taboos there is, hey, be careful with that. This is a sign where a lot of times we don't find ourselves truly aligned in Odimeji with our family, specifically our siblings. Making sure that we're fostering strong relationships with our siblings is important. Making sure we're not going to war with our siblings, both spiritual and biological siblings, right? That's going to be always important. Odimei is very important in Ifa because this is the birth of the Ikofa. When Orunmila said, I need to give all the humans, right, hand of Ifa so they can better understand their destiny, we can reconstruct their destiny so they can get the wisdom and they can align themselves, right? Because that's super important. That's the reason why you did the spiritual investments of receiving warriors, hand of Ifa, so you understand how to walk, how to speak, how to align yourself so that you can be successful in life. The other big thing about Odimeji is that this is a sign that, we have to make sure that because we have so many packs with the Eguns, we got packs with Olokun, we got packs with Ogun, we got packs with Eshu. You find yourself in so many different packs that you begin to neglect maybe even your household. You begin to neglect even your marital status or your intimate partner or your partner or whatever you want to call it, but that other person that's sharing that life with you, right? Between you, your kids, etc. So we got to make sure that that cohesionness is there. And we got to make sure that there's a tight bond there in Odimeji. In addition, when you talk about Odimeji, we talk a lot about, this is a sign that the Orishas, are marking that the alignment is necessary for them. The folks who have Odimeji should align themselves with the Orishas, right? How they do that is through crowning. How they do that is crowning the orishas that they need to crown, right? In the sense of Isheshe, and I'm not trying to get into Isheshe. There's different orishas you can crown, etc. But in the side of Lukumi, right, my side, you need to go get crowned, and that's the bottom line. That's something that's going to be in your path, one way, shape, or form, right? So when we talk about the aspects of what that truly means. It's meanings that, that we have to establish a spiritual home. That home has to be not only aligned in a good sense, right? And has to be, in order, but spiritually and physically, there's going to be a lot of benefit, right, to that. So, hey, thank you very much, Moya. I appreciate you. Welcome, welcome to the subscriber team, to the membership team. And then, so as you begin to kind of go through that, I hope that gives you a good understanding. There's a good ebo that we do with Odi Meji that has a lot to do with, and I'm not going to get into the secrets, but the Babalaos and the Olorishas can do this, where they get the yama, they do it 3 days. There's a garbage, right? White candle, and then it's not taken out, but it's in order for us to align some of those eguns that are free forming around the home and maybe causing a little bit of disturbances. That's going to be very important. Making sure that we align ourselves with Obatala and Odimeji. There's another good bowl there, where we take fish, watercress, a duck egg, you know what I mean? We work through Obatala and we perform a ceremony there. A lot of great things in Odi Meji. Okay. Now, let's talk about Endibre. Endibre or Odi Obe, right? This is a sign that is very interesting because this is the sign that kind of predicates what I was just telling you in Odi Meji, right? Odi Meji is the father or the mother of the signs, right? We'll call it, right? The parent of the sign. And now we have all these other Odus that come into play. Now we got to better understand what that means. And when we talk about Odi Meji, something that's important is that Odi, or I'm sorry, Odi Obe or Ndibre, we talk about where it teaches us to triumph over betrayal. Odiobe or Ndibre is always going to be that sign that's going to have some trials and tribulations, but will always triumph through truth. And there's a pataki in this particular Odun that talks about it recounts where Orunmila was falsely accused by Eshu and later vindicated, of course, right? But it talks a lot about the negotiation of karma and power, right? It talks a lot about making sure the reversals of things that are done bad to us is understood. Because when you begin to look at Odiobe, we talk a lot about the resurrection of things. Specifically in Ndibre, we talk about the resurrection of the Egun. We talk about the drumming ceremonies of the Egun. In this particular sign, this is, and the reason why the drummings come in is because the first drum was created in Ndibre, right? This was where, created by a master carpenter, of Odudua, right? And I don't want to get into Odudua, but we'll talk about the custodian or the governor of this world, right? This is or of this earth, right? That's Odudua, but it happened in Ndibre, or Diobe, right? And it was created by Odiobe. This is a strong Odun of communication, investigation, vigilance, spying, right? Injustices. This is a strong sign that even talks about adultery to a certain point, which is why the relationship between you and your partner have to be tight. And you got to make sure that you don't fall into those type of different temptations. You got to make sure that indeed that you understand what you're saying, how you're saying it, and who are you saying it to. You got to know your audience. You got to stop being so inquisitive, right? There's an old saying in this, right, where the curiosity killed the cat. You got to be careful and deal with it. That's very important, because particularly there's another thing that is spoken in Endibre where it says the voice of Endibre takes up all of Igba Ifá. Right? And what it's saying is that it aligns, because if it's an Odun of communication, it aligns with Awa Olofin or Dudua, right? It aligns with the spiritual realm of things. This is a sacred sign that if you align with Ondibre, you are a sacred person nonetheless. Custodian of the drums, the resurrection of the Eguns. You're talking about a master carpenter that's aligning itself with cosmic power. Endibre is a beautiful sign. Endibre is one of those signs that has the ability to do so much that it kind of sometimes even seeks pleasures, right? As opposed to obligation and responsibilities. And And what I'm trying to say, if I had to relate it to modern day, is you got to be careful that you don't, focus too much on response or too much on partying or seeking pleasures or, I don't know, going out with the fellas or the girls and having a good night out. You got to make sure that at the end of the day, you understand that you have obligations and responsibilities. Oye, bro, boy, bucheche, mi hijado, KD. Hey, yeah, yeah. Hey, bendiciones to you, my farafun Diego. Okay. And so as we begin to kind of completely flush this out further, we have to talk about endibre as one of those signs, right? That enjoys the nice things in life. And endibre, I'm not saying you can't enjoy the nice things. You should enjoy the nice things, right? You should go out and party. You should dress well. You should go dancing. You should enjoy the luxuries and things. Right? But you just have to make sure that you're not doing it at the sacrifice of obligations and responsibilities. The other thing about this Odun is that you begin to kind of see that you're easily affected by environments, right? The physical side of it, your body and how it reacts can be, through irritation, skin problems, allergies. You got to make sure that you tackle those things because those things will affect you because that's a spiritual thing, right? So if you have to take that Zyrtec, you got to take that Claritin, whatever it is you got to take, right? I'm not sponsoring anybody, but I'm just saying take something, but those are things that are easily susceptible to your body because you're aligned with the sign. So if you have this sign in Ipofa, Wofaka, or Ifa, that's something to remember. The other thing that you got to remember as we begin to kind of understand this a little bit is that this is a sign, right, that says that, there can be things in our life that can be unjust, right? There's things in this life where people are going to commit those injustices, right, to us. And we got to make sure of two things in this sign. One is that we cannot be the one that's committing injustices. We have to be very ethical, moral people and endeavor it. But two, we got to make sure that as we align ourselves with this sign and do the abosas in this sign and we offer the right things in this sign, that removes some of those injustices that align themselves with this sign. And now we become kind of the keeper and the gatekeeper of our own misfortune. Right? We close that door, lock it, and we can avoid it, right? Just by doing something as simple as aligning ourselves ethically and morally. In addition, this is a sign where, there's just so much going on in this sign that you may even have the temptations, right, to do things that are illegal, unethical, immoral. That's what I said. You have to align yourselves ethically, morally, and legally because Individe has the potential and actually has the power to draw on, right, to a lot of the delinquents, a lot of the illegal stuff that happens in this world. And you find yourself surrounded by these people, right? At times they can be your friends, your siblings, they can be whatever. And you got to be very careful with that, right? So in addition, don't fall into those temptations, right? I'm not saying you got to, kill relationships and whatnot, but those things can cause you problems. The orishas and the eguns and Ndibra, something that's important is it requires family unity. And Ndibra is a sign that says, listen, you need to unify yourself in a unified front in order to ensure that your alignment is 100% on point. Making sure that you understand that if you don't align yourself with the orishas and the eguns, you risk, right, breaking up those relationships, whether it's family, friends, intimate partners, etc., or marriage. You got to be careful that you don't allow yourself to overthink things because in Endibre, there's a sense of what we call osobu aron cafeteleri, where the person begins to torment their own minds and with thoughts that makes them sick, right? That drives them right to stress, to anxiety, and those things. So you have to have a clear mind, a peaceful mind, knowing that you're doing right. Everything's gonna align themselves. I do what I have to do with the orishas and the eguns, and boom, everything works great. This is a sign where we have to be careful. Kind of like I was mentioning earlier, we try to align ourselves with our jobs, our bosses, the companies or wherever we work at or what we do in life. Maybe you're a homemaker and your life and your profession is the home, right? Taking care of the house and the kids. All those things gotta be in place, right? And you got to make sure you're doing it well, but you're also doing it in a cohesive nature where things are flourishing and things are going well. That's indibre, right? So then, with that said, respect the oceans, the seas, and the beaches. I said it earlier, right? All these series of things talks about these creations. Odi Meji talks about those creations. So be respectful of the oceans, the sea, the beach, etc. So you're not taken in by that power, because you notice you're like a sponge and you will absorb that power. And absorbing that power and cleaning yourself with the ocean and beach is a beautiful thing. But if you do it to a point where now you're tempting that power, or you get overcome by that power. For example, you go to the beach, you get pulled in by a current, right? You can fear drowning, right? Those things are important to always remember. And indeed, right? I'll give you a couple of ideas of things that you need to do, right? If you have not been told and you have this sign in Awofaka, Ikofa, Ifa, whatever that may be, right? This is a sign of celebrations, drumming ceremonies, right? This is a sign where we have to do a drumming ceremony even to Chango. We got to make sure that we're doing a drumming ceremony, maybe to the Eguns. Maybe we have to receive a sign if you're a male. If you're a female, once you hit menopause, you got to make sure you receive the Wido of Osign, right? You got to reinforce your Ogun, because Ogun is very highly important in the sign. You got to be careful not to misplace any of your spiritual things like your Orishas, your Deleguns, your Kings, your book, or all your Itas. All these things are important things to always remember in Vibes. Okay, now we get to the next sign, Odiyekun. Okay, making sure nobody got any questions on Odi Meji or Ndibre in the chat. I don't see anything, so boy. Okay, so now we got Odiyekun. In Odiyekun, we talk about the birth, right, of children. We talk about riches and commerce, right? Prosperity, right? The good things, right? But, this is a sign where it talks a lot about where in Odiyekun, you have the ability where all things small can become great. But all things small can also become a ticking time bomb and a giant explosion. And you have to pick which one is which. Some of the things that you can do, right, as you align yourself with this Odu, is making sure that you do the bosses of this Odu in order to ensure that the Eguns are good, making sure that Eshu is good, and making sure that Obatala is good. Those are going to be the key takers in here. Nonetheless, this is a strong sign where I wouldn't be surprised that if you have Odiyeko and Awofaka, Ikofa, or even Ifa, and you're not a child of Chango. Because Chango is the one that's truly running, point in this sign. This is an Odun. To go even further, is the Odun where the mass of the Eguns or the Olokun festivals were first consecrated. This is a very strong sign of Olokun of Ifa. Where I was saying earlier, where I believe that you should probably receive a Olokun. It doesn't matter which one you received. You get the old one from Ocha first, and then you can align yourself with the Olokun of Ifa later when you need it. The Yekun to Olokun of Ifa. Bottom line. Right? And this is what's going to begin to ensure that you receive those commerce, prosperities, the riches, and the blessings, right? That's what's going to ensure your alignment. This is an Odun where, we have to respect Mafarafun Oya, Yansa, Yorisha, right? This is a sign that aligns not only with Chango, but Oya, and begins to talk about, how that plays itself out with Oya in order to get us to where we need to get to. Oya has to be understood here. Oya has to be respected here. Oya has to be part of, and if you're crowned, making sure you have Oya, that's key, but also too, if you're not crowned, figure out a way to feed or give something to Oya so that she can align better with you. More importantly, in this sign, we got to be careful, about taking on too much of those things that make us feel good. Maybe we like to drink. Maybe we like to use some form of recreational drug, or maybe we take a lot of pills because a doctor prescribed. You got to be very careful about those things because it doesn't favor you. All right, so you got to make sure moderation is important. This is one of the signs that says, listen, You cannot laugh, right, or make fun of people that have imperfections. You can't be one of those people that, everybody else becomes the punchline of your joke, right? This is a sign that says as we do that, we begin to unmask the Eguns, and those Eguns can bring disruptions to your life. You got to be careful and maybe alter maybe a little bit of that personality if you do have that sense of doing things. And we all know who those people are. Always got jokes, so they always want to kind of tease people. You got to be very careful with that. The Yekun, you have to be very careful, right? You can't never really get upset or speak badly, right, about your elders, right? Because they're one day they will save you. Or the Yekun is the one that gets saved by the elders. You got to maintain those good relationships because you're going to need them at the end of the day. Right? Or the Yekun is a sign that says, you can't necessarily beware, right? Beware because, the Yekun, you have a lot of power in your tongue. You got a lot of power and voice. Right. So when you curse people out or you tell them you hope they die, you tell them you hope they get hit by a car or something like that, those things might happen. And you got to be careful with that. You have a responsibility, right? Ethics and morals is important. So you got to be careful of your behavior, right? But more importantly, on the reverse side of Odiekun, why you have to receive a local Ifá, why you got to give thanks to Oya, why you got to, remember who Chango is in this sign, is that Odiekun has the innate, and I hate to say this, but you're kind of like the curse catcher. You're like the person that people like to do witchcraft to and brujeria, and you got to be careful. This sign is one of those signs where it says, hey, watch yourself, especially within spiritual circles, because for one reason or another, people in this sign will bump into someone who just, gets rubbed the wrong way, or people go to other people in order for them to get, put brujeria on them and things like that. And Odiyekun, you got to be very careful with that. So please just know your audience. Beware your behaviors. There's money. This is a sign of money. Money is not going to be a problem in Obiyekun. If you align yourself, money just flows on through. Right? And that's a beautiful thing. That's a good thing because again, money can draw many benefits. Right? Not all the benefits, but draw a lot of benefits. In addition, in Odiyekun, we talk about dressing in white as much as possible. Make sure that you receive the orishas to ensure stability. So the Ekun is another sign. You got to get crowned. You got to get crowned. Well, I'm not going to say you got to get crowned, but at a minimum, you should be feeding the whole orisha foundation, at least feeding them what they call la santo lavao, four-legged animals. Hear what everybody's got to say because that's how you gain your stability is by hearing the advice of those orishas to better align you or just get crowned, right? It's either or, but Odiyekun has those options because the intent here is that you receive the orishas, right, to ensure stability. In Odiyekun, this is a sign where nonetheless, we got to be careful with love, intimacy. A lot of times we find ourselves struggling with relationships. And when we struggle with these relationships, it's okay. When we struggle, it's because Eshu is removing people out of our path, and we got to be able to take that and notice the sign and say, you know what, this person's not going to work out for me because a new and a better partner will come for you. That's Odiyekun. In Odiyekun, you got to be careful again with the betrayal of those relationships. If that relationship is not working out, that relationship is just not there, then get rid of it. You know what I mean? And because if not, they're going to get rid of the relationship either way. So either you initiate, they initiate, one way or another, it's not going to work out. So you just got to kind of nourish that relationships that you have and know when enough is enough, right? Very important. So again, a lot of good obras, a lot of good bosses in Odiyekun. One of the big things about Odiyekun is to remember you are the gateway to the Eguns and transformation. Rich ancestral rights, but more positivity and the prosperity of things physically. The Yekun is one of those signs that we got to be careful, right? Not to ignore ancestral law, right? Making sure that that respect is there, making sure our behavior is there, right? This is a sign. Iku is very much in this sign, right? But wealth follows when the Eguns are appeased and Iku is no longer in the picture. which is the reason why we align ourselves with the Orishas, the reason why we give thanks to Oya, you know what I mean, as she kind of ferries these Eguns through. So very important there. Bendiciones, ya, che. I think you resonate with Odi. All right, now let's go into Odi Iwuri. And we're already at 40 plus minutes, so hopefully let's see how far we can get through this. But Odi Iwuri. So Odi Iwuri is one of these signs where I also warn about miscommunication. This is a sign of miscommunication based on spiritual stagnation. All right, try to say that 3 times, right? 3 times fast. Miscommunication causes spiritual stagnation. Miscommunication is caused by spiritual stagnation. Miscommunication caused by spiritual stagnation. What does this mean? It's often tied to, again, the relationships and the false promises that you have with your elders, right? Maybe it's, I looked at the obligations and responsibilities and I ignored them. But here's the healing of Odi Iwuri. Odi Iwuri, you begin to heal after you have clarity, right? After you have confession, right? Being true to yourself and being true to others and saying, listen, let me just confess that I don't think I like the way you are presenting me with my, I don't know, spirituality, my physical, my whatever, right? Maybe it's a relationship. Hey, listen, I don't like the way you're treating me. And you got to confess these things and not hold it in. It's very important on D. Woody, right? And then head rogaciones. I can't extend it enough, but your rogations, your head rogations is going to be key in this particular sign of Odi Woody, right? Going forward. And your elders can help navigate you through that. So Odi Woody, in short, Odi Oro, right, is phenomenons. It's wars, it's transformation, right? This is a sign where the world had to be saved because of Eshu's fury, right? This is a sign that says change is going to come to the person's life. Change is inevitable in this life. If you align with this sign, Awofaka, Ikofa, or Ifa, understand that change is inevitable. You have to be flexible. You got to prepare yourself. You got to make sure you have plans set up. You got to make sure you know how you're going to execute these things because things will change. In El Oro, this is a sign where we got to be careful, right? Of people that move things from one place to another. Transportation. If you work in transportation, you're a truck driver, etc., you got to be careful because this is associated with things that can go wrong in moving one thing to another, right? This is another sign that talks heavily about things that have to do with back in the day when people used to traffic drugs or humans, or I mean, the hell, we deal with that today. And you got to be careful that you don't fall into that play. If you do, you need protection. Right? Again, I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to tell people you're doing everything wrong, line yourself up, but I'm just here to give you advice. Right? And in the OD series of things, you need a lot of protection. You need a lot of things to align you. You need a lot of things that are going to help you, conquer everyday life. Right? And OD Oro, this is a sign that you have to give thanks to Yemaya. Ma farafun Yemaya. Okay, in this sign. And more importantly, Ma farafun Orunmila, which are always going to be present. Two different divinities are always going to be there for you to anchor you down and make sure they take care of you. This is a sign where, again, we got to be careful. You're going to hear me say this a lot of times in these series of things. The ocean, respect the sea, right? Try not to, spend too much time in the ocean or go deep into the ocean. It's a strong sign for that. This is a sign where we talk a lot about, Ila, Obalofue, Chango, the Eguns, Ochun, Yemaya, Obatala. This sign aligns with those Orishas, right? And the person is always going to need spiritual protection, right? And their head is always going to need to be clear. And that's going to be the challenge that you're going to have. And that's the reason why there's always going to be that disconnect, right, between elders and the person. Spiritual stagnation because of miscommunication, making sure that you and your partner, your family, your friends, you guys are communicating well. This is a sign where you got to be careful because in this sign, if you align with the sign, you can be easily fooled by your emotions. You can be easily fooled because you follow your heart and not your mind enough, right? So be very careful, right, when it comes to those things, but also be very careful that you're not taken advantage of. Making sure that your friends, your family, whoever, doesn't fool you, right? Or put a cloak over your eyes. You have to open up your eyes. You got to be able to see life for what it is. And that's important. The oro, you have to sing to the Eguns. If you don't have a teja de Egun, and this is your sign, and I will fa equal fa, right? And you don't have a teja de Egun, you're wrong. You need to go get a teja de Egun. Go talk to your elders. Make sure they prepare for you so you receive it. If you're part of Isheshe, get your Egungun. If you or and your Ibeorum. If you are Ifá, right? You're about allowed. Make sure you have your Odu and you know where your Odu is and how it's mounted and make sure everything's 100. You know what I mean? So all those things are important. Because if you don't align yourself with Odiorum properly, you find yourself on the ups and downs. You find yourself very moody. You find yourself, up one day, down another, one step forward, two steps back, and you find yourself in this weird place that you don't want to be in. This is also a sign that talks a lot about where the person's character changes during the course of the day because of all the spiritual inflictions points that they can receive. And that's important to understand. This is a sign, right, that says that small things can turn into big things as well, but particularly debates and talks and fights. And you got to be careful not to be, subject to that. That's important. The other big thing about Odiorum is that you got to make sure that when people die, and I always used to say this, and my family and I, we sometimes we all agree. But it's typically when somebody dies that the family comes together, and if the person that died left things to the family, you know what I mean? That's when the war starts, property inheritances and stuff like that, right? You got to be careful about those things, right? Making sure that you go about things the right way, not necessarily to ruffle feathers or to pound your chest and say it's mine, this is why, etc. But just go about it the right way, because again, the small things become big things when it comes to fighting communications, right? There's an Egun in this sign that needs to be appeased. There's a spiritual misa that has to be done for you if you have this sign. We have to better understand where these Eguns are, where they align, what's your spirit guide. You got to get an investigative misa, right, to truly understand your spiritual framework, because that's gonna assist you in maintaining your luck in this sign. This is a sign where you can neglect Eshu. Right? Eshu needs to be attended 24/7, 365. You need to make sure, well, let me take that back, not 365, but make sure that you're on top of your Eshu game. And make sure that you're attending him when you need to. Make sure that you're aligning yourself with him. Make sure that you go to him for problems. Eshu is very important in this sign, right? Again, I mentioned Yemaya, I mentioned Orunmila. You're gonna need protection, right? For your waist, right? If you're gonna be pregnant, or if you have issues with your stomach and health, make sure that you light a cigar to Chango. Make sure you attend Eshu. All those things need to happen. The Oro. Okay, very important there. All right. Hey, Buro boy, Abuche Janae. Many blessings to you. Ah. All right. Hey guys, so now we're gonna go into Odirosun. And we're gonna do Odirosun, and then we're gonna probably stop there, right? Because we're gonna probably hit the hour with Odirosun. Right. And again, we'll do part two, next week, and part three the week after, and we'll get after it, okay? So Odirosun. Odirosun, we talked about a lot of the one's inner circle may be threatened. At the end of the day, one's inner circle is important. Odi Irosun is one of these signs that you have to make sure that your circle is tight. You got to make sure you know who is in your circle. You got to make sure that trust is there, nonetheless. Because in Odi Irosun, this is where betrayal is close to the heart. This is where betrayal is within the inner circle. This is where it encourages us to be a little bit more quiet, Be careful what we say and how we say it, right? Gain the spiritual protections. But as you're being silent, right, you're observing and you already know who you need to cut out of your life, right? Those things are going to be very important in Odiroso. But more importantly, as we go into Odiroso, we talk about different parts of the brain when we talk about Odiroso that could be affected by life experiences or spiritual misalignment. You got to make sure that you are not conflicted with the way you are moving, right? On the way you are going, right? You got to make sure that you are not making yourself sick through this sign because of insurities of where you're going spiritually and physically. Who am I with? What's my friends? Who is it? You know, what is those blockages and those barriers that you have? So again, if you have the sign Awafaka, Ikofa, or Ifa, there's a lot that needs to be done here. Particularly, this is another sign in OD series, right? Where it's very spiritual sign. You're a spiritualist in this sign. You know, this is a sign that talks about the person needs to understand their ancestors and their spirit guide. This is a sign that talks about that you possess eguns, right? That relate things to you in dreams or even talk to you in your ear. Mafarafundi egun. Odirosung is the sound the ocean makes when it's angry, right? When the waves are tall and they're just crashing. That's Odirosung. It's very much it's very much attached to the temperament of the world or the ocean, or better yet, the earth, when it's not necessarily, I want to say, I guess we could say when it's angry, right? And we gotta be understanding about that. We gotta be very careful on this sign that we don't have bad sentiments, right? Or we become immoral. We gotta be very careful in this sign that there's confusion that um, don't confuse intimacy with the relationship. Don't confuse, and I'm going to say this as bluntly as I can because I think that's important, right? But don't go into a nightclub, you have a one night stand with somebody, and then you think that's love, or you think you're going to get something from it. Well, in this particular sign, the Oshun, you got to make sure that you don't confuse intimacy with relationships. You got to make sure you understand where you stand, not only with your relationships, but with your family, your friends, and your profession. You got to make sure you're not confusing or have mixed signals. Right? You got to make sure that at the end of the day, you also have to look into your childhood trauma. In this particular Odu, you carry a lot of baggage from when you were younger. You carry a lot of baggage, right, that affects you and has made you who you are today. And it's time to cut that anchor off so that you can float into greatness. Right? Orun talks a lot about now. Odirosu talks a lot about that. Right? This is a sign where the Eguns, you eat, you sleep, and you walk with Egun. I told you, you dream with them. They talk to you in your ear. You got to make sure that you align yourself. You have your boy, your spiritual altar, whatever that looks like in your lineage. You got to make sure that the Egun is there. You got to make sure that you're doing everything that you need to do with the Eguns. Particularly, even if you find yourself, and I'm always curious about this sign, like many other signs, I talk about this alignment with the Egun, and maybe you got to get scratched in Palo Moyumbe, become a gandulero, you know what I mean? Get closer to the Eguns, to work the Eguns, because the Eguns is going to take care of you. Because if you don't work these things, you find yourself frustrated. You find yourself with mental illness. You find yourself with people trying to diagnose you with things, and it's because of that emotional imbalance, right, that can turn to something different. It's that spiritual imbalance that can turn to something different. It can be that childhood trauma that turns into something, and you got to be careful with that, right? If you're a man and you have this sign, you got to be careful with your boys downstairs, right? Those private parts, right? Making sure that everything is working right, making sure that just make sure everything is working right. Let me not get too much into that because I don't think that's necessary. But that's important. And this is a sign where there's going to be hardships. That's the reason why alignment's important. That's the reason why I'm talking the way I'm talking. Chango protects you in the sign. Chango says that he raised you. Chango says you need to receive me. Another sign where, in one way, shape, or form, right? You're either going to wash Orisha or you're going to crown Orisha. And if you are a son or daughter of Chango, you're going to go crown Orisha. That is the advice there. The person in this sign is liable, right? And remember what I told you earlier. This is a sign that talks about the different parts of the brain, right? But if we're not careful and we don't nurture you properly with this Odu, you have the potential of throwing all your Orishas away, of just getting angry and saying enough is enough. That's a serious matter, right? And we got to make sure we're nurturing again. We got to make sure that we're here for you. The elders have to take care of you. You got to make sure that you're not going to get infatuated with intimacy or with partners where you try to do brujeria or witchcraft in the sign. And you can't do that. You got to be careful. Odi Oshun is a child of Olokun, aligned very well with Olokun. You're another sign, and you're going to see that a lot of the Odis, you need to receive Olokun of Ifá because that's what's going to help you at the end of the day. You got to be careful of false witnesses, right? You got to be careful, right, of how you carry yourself to ensure that you save yourself. You have to do it both. You got to feed Chango. You got to receive Olokun. You got to crown if you're Chango, or at least wash and hear the advice of all the Orishas. And when I say wash Orishas, folks, I'm not into washing Orishas with just some feathers. No, four-legged animals, Ita, we need to understand who you are completely. You have to do spiritual baths. Right? You got to do head rogations. This is a serious sign that requires serious action. All right. Hey, so this brings us to 56 minutes, right? At least I can see on my side. I think it's a little longer than that. But hey, as always, guys, like, share, subscribe. If you want to be a member, right? Join the membership teams. See which one works for you. A lot of great content in there in order to kind of help build you, right? This is content that I use and content that I speak even with my own ile, but I want to share this with you all, not to replace your personal spiritual houses or iles, but that's the goal. You like what I'm saying and you like how things are flowing, again, share the content, talk to people, let them know there is good information out there so it can better help them. And with that said, we will continue with Odiowani, right, or Dimoni, right, during the next part of this series. And with that said, I don't see any questions in the chat. So, Iburu, Iboya, Ibucheche, everybody in Cyberland, I'll monitor the chat just for a little bit longer. And with that said, I hope you all have a blessed day. And Mafarafun Diego, Mafarafun Olodumari, Orishas, and specifically Orunmila and the wisdom of Ifa. All right, you guys have a blessed one. If fair Bawala, at least I hope so. Checking out.